What is up, you jackwagons? I am Speed Fury, and I am back with the next part of What If I Was in the Pokemon anime. Also, some of my papers have fallen to the ground, so I'm picking them up right now. There we go. Now, last time we left off, the gang was about to go and challenge the... Well, ow! My finger. What the heck? Ow, why does that hurt like that? I guess I must have popped that knuckle a bit too hard. Anyway... They were on their way to battle the Water-type gym. Now, we could get into the Water-type gym right off the bat, but there is something that I want to get out of the way first. So we are adding a new character to the group, sort of. He's not going to be a character that comes up very often, and he's of course he's basically like he just pops up every now and then. And there's a reasoning behind this, and it's not a reasoning that I normally would put in my stories. The reasoning I'm putting him in is because I found somebody on Reddit found my designs very interesting and very likable, and he asked for several requests of certain characters. I'm not going to show what those requests are because some of them I'm not very proud of. But he also asked if I could make him his own versions of certain Pokemon, which I did, and then I told him that he realizes that I'm going to have to put him in the story. Well, I didn't tell him that, but he knows that I'll be putting his characters and his Pokemon in the story. Now we'll get into how he gets in later, but for now, let's go ahead and continue with the story. So last we left off, the gang had just barely gotten out of the desert area. Oop! I just dropped a sharpener. Oh well, I'll pick it up later. And now they were heading towards a nearby town where the gym leader was said to be doing some auctions. Now, Drax was a bit annoyed that they had to travel this far in the first place, mostly because of the fact that, well, it already took them quite a bit of time to actually get back to challenging the gyms in the first place, and now they got to go all the way to another town to find the gym leader, and then they got to head back to actually do the gym battle. Spectraline was attempting to soothe Drax as his grumbling was kind of making her uncomfortable, and she would rather not have her partner, or her mate, I guess is what she would call it, in a bad mood, as she didn't like it when he was in a bad mood. It was at this point that they noticed a man coming out of the town nearby. The man had long hair that went down a little bit past his neck, and he looked like he was tired. Well, not tired, just more along the lines of bored. Drax also noticed the strange-looking Greninja that was standing next to him. Said Greninja, at first he thought was a shiny, but then he remembered that shiny Greninja are completely black. This Greninja was black, but where the yellow would be of a normal Greninja, it was brown. The white where the Greninja normally would have it was gray instead. And the Greninja overall, instead of having star-shaped markings on their legs, it had what looked like kunai-shaped markings. Drax approached the man and asked him what the deal was with his weird-looking Greninja, and he said that his Greninja was a weird case, as it was a different type entirely. Instead of being dark, well, not entirely, just one of its types had been replaced. Instead of being dark and water type, it was dark and fighting type. And instead of using water shurikens, as it was not a water type anymore, it used dark energy kunai that it would throw, and those kunai were red in color, a dark red. The man introduced himself as Shin, and that he was very fond of catching certain Pokemon, but the only thing strange about whenever he caught rare Pokemon is that they seemed to be oddly very clingy towards him. He currently had around 9 Pokemon. And Greninja was not his only Pokemon that was a Delta species, as he was now informed of what it was. His Cerulege, who was actually his partner, was also a Delta species. She was still a Cerulege, but her typing was very much different. She wasn't even fire type, despite the fact that she still had the flames coming out of her body and the flaming like swords. She was actually a dark and, well, not dark, fighting and fairy type. I believe that's the type he wanted me to use for her. Yeah, it's fairy fighting type. Anyway, aside from that, he also had a Frostlass. Said Frostlass being rather, well, somewhat smaller than a regular Frostlass, but still being a Frostlass. A Vileplume, which had had a little bit of a brighter shade of pink flower instead of having the darker shade that it usually is. And the most shocking part of his team was a Reshiram. Said Reshiram was also immediately ready to throw hands with his Zekrom. That wasn't the only surprise, though, as he seemed to have another legendary, a Tapu Lele. His other Pokemon consisted of a Lilligant, which Drax was not surprised at, as that was a very popular Pokemon back in his region. A Goodra, which was not currently on his team, but he still had. A Hisuian Typhlosion, and a Hisuian Samurott. But the strangest one was a Pokemon that he'd never seen before, which he had currently added to his team. A Pokemon that seemingly looked like it was made of origami and had blades for hands. Anytime he brought out one of his Pokemon, they would immediately go to circling around him. In Kartana's case, which is what the sword Pokemon's name was, or just hovering around him, even going as far as to clinging onto his shoulder. Drax recognized the way these Pokemon behaved because it was the same way that the five female Pokemon he had on his team behaved around him. Drax told Shin what was going on, and that all his Pokemon, even the Reshiram and Tapu Lele, and the Kartana somehow, which the Pokedex said was genderless, all were infatuated with him. Shin said he was kind of already aware of this, but he pretended to not acknowledge it for a while because of the fact that, well, it isn't exactly normal for a human and a Pokemon to be together, let alone this many Pokemon, especially two legendaries, and whatever Kartana was. He said that he would make an exception if they were all part human at least, but he didn't really want people to think of him as, well, a monster. And as far as he knew, there was really no way to make a Pokemon half human. Drax could say otherwise. Drax did so by introducing Shin to his girlfriend, and against his will, by the name of Spectraline. When Shin saw this, he was very, very taken off guard by her more feminine appearance and very obviously female assets. He asked what this was about, and Drax said that she was actually a descendant of a Pokemon and a human that married once long ago, and she still has human DNA in her system. Shin asked how that's supposed to help him, and Drax said that he had accidentally come up with made a serum that allowed a Pokemon to take on, well, a human-like appearance and make them part human. He then went on to explain about what happened with his Glaceon and how exactly he kept using the serum, even if he didn't want to. Drax then let Frostbite, the Glaceon, out of her Pokeball to introduce her to Shin. Shin, on the other hand, was very intrigued by the very noticeable changes with this Glaceon and what they normally were supposed to look like. He then looked over to his team, and then noticed that all of them were very much eager to actually have this serum. After contemplating this for a minute, eventually Shin decided that he would ask Drax if it was possible to make the serum for his Pokemon. Drax said he could, but he didn't know how well it would work, considering that some of his Pokemon were genderless and didn't really, or at least that's what the Pokedex said, and didn't really know how to use a serum to change their gender, or change their gender strictly to female. It might be easy for his genderless Pokemon, considering they are said to not have gender, but Drax didn't know if he had any other Pokemon that were any other gender. Which Shin said that all of his Pokemon were actually female, aside from the legendaries that were said to be genderless. For the first time in Drax's life, he had to ask his daughter for help. Red was more than happy to help her father with making multiple different kinds of serums, especially since the serums had to be adjusted slightly for each Pokemon. For his Ceruledge, her serum was the easiest to make, as they already had they could just extract some of Drax's Ceruledge's DNA, and then just mix it with the serum they already had. As for some of the other Pokemon, such as Greninja or even Frostlass, they needed to figure out a way to make a serum that came with clothing. which was already kind of hard to do. The serum that they usually use for this kind of thing was only used on Pokemon that already had a clothing-like appearance, such as Gardevoir. It was at this point that Latios actually spoke up, saying that perhaps they could ask some of the nearby bug types for assistance in this matter. With their ability to use String Shot, maybe they could make some clothing right here on the spot. And all of the other Pokemon would have to do is just tell what kind of clothing they were in the market for. Drax is surprised he didn't think of this before, and that's when Red spoke up, saying that she could also forcibly make her hair grow, and they could weave that into clothing for them as well. So after getting all of the Pokemon, and specifically what kind of outfits they were in the market for, they took this kind of slowly. They didn't want to like give all of them the serum at the same time, as they would have to like, you know, get the correct measurements for said clothing. Which Drax was now very miffed at the fact that he had to play the role of seamstress, or whatever the heck people who make clothing are called. They decided to just use the serum that was made for that Glaceon originally had took. This made it easier for them to take the measurements of the Pokemon, because they would all have more or less the exact same body type that Frostbite had. So they took Frostbite's measurements, and hopefully that was a correct measurement for what they were looking for. And in case you're wondering, Drax is about 5'4", meaning that and Glaceon, the reason she looks the way she does is because the DNA that she looks that way, the DNA that was responsible for turning her into that specific appearance, is from Lorelei, the anime version, not the game version. And Glaceon, or Frostbite, is actually taller than Drax. She's like 6 feet tall. So they began to just distribute the serums after they had made the clothing. Ceruledge was first, and her new appearance hadn't really changed all that much. She, in fact, looked like just a pink version of Drax's Ceruledge. Her swords were a bit different, and she had a more metallic pink-like armor, but her hair didn't look as much like flames anymore and looked more like actual hair. Being a fairy and fighting type, though, this didn't really surprise them. The next one for this to happen to was Greninja, and she was immediately given the clothing after her new form change, which her clothing was, well, Drax would normally say he didn't agree with the outfit choice, as it looked more like she was trying like way too hard to seduce her trainer, which, to be fair, she probably was. Her outfit consisted of a Kona Weech style outfit, reminiscent of a certain character from a certain game. Drax also had to notify Shin that this would also give each Pokemon the Battle Bond ability, meaning that all of his Pokemon were basically going to, at some point, be able to do a whole weird fusion thing, or mental fusion thing with him that allowed him to feel their pain if they ever got hurt in battle. The next Pokemon to get on his team to get this was his Frostlass. Now, the Frostlass's outfit was very different from how Drax imagined what Drax imagined she would pick. He thought her outfit would be very kimono styled, as Frostlass already kind of had that kind of style of outfit in the first place, or that's what it looked like at least. What he did not expect was for her to grow a second pair of arms where normal human arms would be. She still had the arms that were attached to her head, but she also had human-like arms that wore long, where she had the long arm sleeves attached. The strangest part was though her head. Normally, a Frostlass had a very round and oval-shaped head, but her head shrank down to look more like a human's face, which Drax thought was kind of fitting, considering how stories are told of how Frostlass at one point was a woman, and was a human woman. And so that's his Frostlass. The next member of Shin's team to get this treatment, to get the serum, was his Vileplume. Now, his Vileplume had asked specifically for a pair of overall shorts, and that was kind of it. Nothing else, just the overall shorts, and they had to be the same pattern and look like petals, just like the flower on the top of her head. After taking the serum, the flower on her head drooped a little bit, looking actually more like hair afterwards. The part that Drax was kind of uncomfortable with was the fact that she was only wearing the overalls and nothing else. Also the fact that her feet had no toes whatsoever. She had noticeable human-shaped feet, but there were no toes. Not every humanoid appearance could be, well, exactly humanoid. She didn't really have a nose either, so there was that. Reshiram was by far one of the more confusing ones. For starters, Reshiram being as big as well they were, as Reshiram doesn't have a gender. But she referred to herself as she, which Drax guessed was fitting. It was still hard to come up with a way to make the serum for her, as he hadn't really given the serum to legendary Pokemon before. Not this serum specifically. The serum that Yin and Yang had took was different. And Mewtwo was already a product of human experimentation, so he didn't. That kind of made sense as to why it worked for them. Upon Reshiram taking the serum, though, the part that shocked most everybody there was that she shrunk, like down to the same size as all the others who had taken the serum. The other ones, for the most part, had grown a bit taller, but she actually shrunk down, which Drax guessed was fitting considering that it was with the same DNA. The only thing she wore was a black leotard that looked very similar to the feathers around her body and the fur on her head. Her legs grew longer to look more of that of human legs, and the long strands of hair on the top of her head ended up looking more like pigtails. The two strands on the top and the front of her head also appeared looking like a human-styled haircut that kind of framed her face a little bit. She still had the noticeable dragon-like features, but her face was slightly turned more human. Oddly enough, she was also very intrigued at the fact that she had thumbs now. Drax wondered if it was a thing for all Pokemon that didn't have thumbs before to suddenly be interested in their hands. Her overall appearance, for the most part, looked the same, aside from the fact that she was noticeably more human-shaped. It was then Tapu Lele's turn, and Tapu Lele was a strange case. Drax didn't know how exactly this was going to affect her, as well, Tapu Lele already looked somewhat vaguely human-shaped, but also had, noticeable features that, normally wouldn't be on like normal humans would have, but she didn't, like the fact that she didn't have legs. However, when the transformation into her new form began, the thing around her waist, or the weird cocoon-looking thing, Drax didn't know what that was all about, had seemingly detached from her body and also became somewhat like a dress, sort of, and she had legs now. Drax didn't know how that worked, but he guessed that the serum also gave Pokemon who didn't have legs before legs. Unlike the other members of Shin's team, Tapu Lele was actually given the same serum that Azula was given. This serum actually changing what looked like clothes on her body into actual clothes. She looked kind of like a Hawaiian dancer a little bit. Next up was his Lilligant, and his Lilligant already had clothing like apparel, but Drax still didn't know how this was going to work. He decided to try and give her the serum that Azula had to see how that would work. And it pretty much worked the same, except the weird little yellow thing on her shoulders turned more into what looked like a strapless bikini top. The weird leaf dress thing around her waist turned more into a leaf-like skirt, with her, well, I'm not really sure if Lilligant has feet or not, like the regular one, not the Hisuian version. Her the yellow things on the bottom of her I guess bulb turned into boots. She was pretty much the most human-looking one, aside from the very noticeable leaf arms. But for the most part, she was happy with her appearance, even if she didn't really have hands like the other members of her team. Next up was Hisuian Samurott, and Drax didn't know how this was going to work, and he didn't really know how he felt about seeing a humanoid sea otter creature that was female but also had a mustache. He hoped that wasn't the case. When her transformation was complete, she didn't have the mustache, surprisingly, but the hair on the back of her head but she grew longer white hair out of the back of the shell-like thing on her head, and instead of having the mustache, she had 4 strands of white hair on the side of her face. Her outfit was pretty much pants and a strapless bikini top that looked somewhat like a bunch of bandages around her chest. just like before, she was already still kind of in a bad mood, but Drax expected... Dang it. Drax expected that, considering that she was already kind of a dark type in the first place. Drax really needed to consider getting himself some Hisuian Pokemon. Aside from, you know, the Hisuian Zorua that they met before, because that one belongs to Ash. Next up was Hisuian Typhlosion. And her overall choice of outfit didn't really agree with Drax, as it was, well, isn't exactly what he'd call appropriate for society. She wore a black jacket around her torso. The black jacket also having a fur-like pattern on the cuffs that looked like the flames that were coming out of her neck. She wore a simple purple crop top that revealed her stomach and a bit of her navel. But the part that Drax really wasn't agreeing with was her choice in lower body wear, as in the only thing she was wearing looked like what was essentially a Speedo. Now, Drax could accept this if she was a water type, but she's a fire type. And seeing a Pokemon that was pretty much wearing a bikini bottom with the rest of humanoid-looking Pokemon with a bikini bottom and then like regular clothes on the top end didn't really sit well with him. But she didn't really seem all that bothered by it, and Shin thought it looked good. That was one of the differences between Drax and Shin, is that Shin wasn't really all that bothered by his Pokemon's choice in clothing. Drax was. Then came Goodra, and the only thing Goodra was wearing was literally a lime green bikini. The large, slimy tendrils on the top of her head looked more like actual pigtails now, though. Her tail was still just as large as it was when she was a regular Goodra. Drax asked the reasoning behind Goodra's choice in clothing, and she said that other clothing would be far too restrictive for her and would stick to her body, as, you know, she's a literal giant slime dragon. Oddly enough, the lime green slime that would normally drip from Goodra's chin was no longer visible, but it was still on her arms. Also, she was definitely the most happy out of the group, as she was very much expressive. Shin was very fond of Goodra, as she was always willing to give hugs whenever necessary. And for some reason, it looked like Shin was looking forward to a hug more than ever now. Finally, it was time for Kartana. Now, Kartana's overall appearance was odd in general. Kartana looked more like just living sentient paper, and its face was more along the lines of just a weird-looking star in the middle. It was slightly unsettling to Drax to look at Kartana. The fact it was so small, too, but was apparently able to cut through a steel beam was even more terrifying. After taking the serum, Kartana looked vastly different from how Kartana normally looked. It still had the weird orange collar thing around her waist, around her neck, but her overall appearance looked more human-like, and of course she was taller. The weird shoulder protrusion things was now attached to her chest. Her swords, which were her arms, had now turned into more actual arms, with having 3 fingers at the end of each, but the fingers could still merge into the swords. And her legs looked less papery, but still had noticeable paper-like things on them. The 2 samurai helmet horn things on her head turned more into what looked like pigtails. Or maybe antennae, considering they were coming from the front of her, just above her forehead. As for her face, well, she actually had a regular human face, aside from the fact she didn't have a nose. She had a regular mouth, and the star-shaped thing actually transformed into eyes. Her new form was a lot more, well, less unnerving to look at, and she was overall happy with it, especially with the fact that now she had hands and didn't have to worry about cutting Shin every time she went to embrace him. Shin seemed a little bit too happy with his Pokemon's new appearances. Drax, on the other hand, noticed that his Pokemon were just as equally happy, as if they had been waiting to have this for a long time. Drax decided that it was time for them to part ways with Shin, and said that hopefully they'll meet up again another time. And hopefully this would be less of an awkward meeting. The last thing Drax witnessed from the new group that they just met before leaving, not leaving, but going into the city, was Greninja wrapping her arms around Shin's neck, and him wrapping his arms around her waist without any hesitation. Drax realized that he may have have just played into their hands a little bit there. He was hopefully going to try and forget about what he just saw. The group finally arrived at the auction area, and oddly enough, some weird dude that worked for the gym leader started yelling at them, saying that they would get in the way of what he was doing, or whatever. Drax was more along the lines of irritated at this guy. It seemed more like an overexcited fan over somebody who was supposed to be an assistant to the gym leader. It was then that Drax's Koraidon came out of her Pokeball, against his wishes, and eyed the man up and down. She was still in her battle mode, so she was very much bigger than the man. She looked him up and down before Drax's translator picked up saying, This little brat is no threat. No meat on his bones. Why is he even talking like he has the room to breathe the same air that we do? The man looked over at Drax and said, Aren't you going to call off your Pokemon? Drax simply looked at him and said, I'm kind of tempted to let her eat you right now. The man looked horrified at the statement, but then the gym leader came over and cleared things up, as well as asking Ash to help him win the Seaweed, which Drax was confused as to why Ash was helping win Seaweed. Ash is 10, and kind of a little bit, he's missing a few brain cells. Surprisingly, though, Ash won the Seaweed, which somewhat impressed Drax until he realized that Ash did not know what he was doing the entire time and just kind of winged it. Finally, it was time to head back to the gym, and Drax could not be happier. Well, that's what he would say if he wouldn't have to travel back through a desert to get back to the gym. Luckily, they made it through the desert area with really not much problems, aside from almost getting run over by a seemingly random dust cloud that came out of nowhere. Luckily, they didn't run into it again and made it to the gym. As the gym battle started between Drax and I don't remember the gym leader's name, the water type gym leader, Drax sent out one Pokemon and one Pokemon only. He was not going to put up with a long gym battle this time around. He wanted to get it done and over with. He was frankly very tired and wanted to take a nap. That Pokemon he used being Zekrom. Zekrom pretty much one-shot every single member of the gym leader's team. After receiving the badge from the gym leader, Drax proceeded to turn around and stomp away into the direction of the Pokemon Center. If anyone needs me, I will be in my room sleeping, he said. As the group arrived at the Pokemon Center, Drax immediately ordered rooms for everyone and then walked up to his. As he took off his cloak and his Echo suit and climbed into the bed, it wasn't long before 5 pops could be heard. Those 5 pops being 5 of his Pokeballs, all of which being his 5 romantic partners. All of which who then tackled him onto the bed and just kept him there, pinning him to the bed, but not doing anything else besides simply snuggling into him. This is getting out of hand, said Drax. Shut up and sleep, said Vermilion. The next morning, Drax came out of his room at the exact same time a familiar face came out of his. Both of them looked at each other before saying, "You too, huh?" at the same time. It was Shin, who had his Cerulege clinging to him the same way that Spectraline was clinging to him. Shin explained how he was surprised that Cerulege was this light. Drax said he knows the feeling, as this has happened on more than one occasion to him. There was a moment of silence between the two men before Shin spoke up. So, cuddle pile? He said. Yeah, 5 of them, said Drax. Shin just stared at him for a second before saying, You only got 5? Drax said, That's all I can handle at the moment, and to be honest, I wasn't really all that interested in this relationship in the first place between me and the 5. Also, I was not given a choice. Damn, said Shin. So it's forced? Not exactly, said Drax. If it was forced, I would try to be escaping every chance I got. So you're just in denial then, said Shin. Sure, let's go with that, said Drax. How many have you kissed? He said. 1, and it's the one clinging to me like a teddy bear at the moment. None of the others? He said. Not yet. And besides, it's only been a day. How many have you already kissed? All of them? You work fast, said Drax. While we're on that subject, said a voice, Drax turned down to see that Spectraline was awake now, and now had both feet firmly planted on the ground. Not now, woman, I just woke up, said Drax. Oh, it's not me, she said. She then proceeded to push Drax backwards, to which he fell into the into two arms that were wrapped in purple and blue arm sleeves. He slowly turned his head to what he hoped was not who he thought it was. But when he noticed the two large hands that acted as pigtails, one blue and one purple, he realized he was in trouble. It was Vermilion, and she was in her poison type form. She was in this form specifically because her arms were big enough to wrap around him to prevent his escape. Before Drax could say anything else, she shoved him back into the room and then full on tackled him while he was on the ground. Spectraline followed in close behind as Drax's muffled protest could be heard on the ground. She proceeded to give a single two-fingered salute to Shin before closing the door. A few of Shin's other Pokemon who had heard the commotion walked over to the door to see what was going on, and a few of them had witnessed what had just happened before all looking over at Shin before saying, "Oh, that's the kind of relationship he's in." Shin just stared at the spot where his new friend was for a minute before saying, "Eesh, I don't know if he has it bad or if he has it good." A few hours later, Drax came down to meet up with the rest of his friends. He was rubbing his throat absent-mindedly while trying to get the taste out of his mouth. "What happened to you?" said James. "Let's just say I just went through an ordeal that has now left the combination of the taste of Skittles and grapes in my mouth. Also, my throat is a little bit sore." "Why is that?" said Jesse. "You don't want to know." "I'm just glad the other three didn't get involved," he said under his breath. "Anyway, I gotta go do some training. Zorua has yet to evolve yet, and I still gotta get my Delta Species Magikarp to evolve. If he actually wants to." While we're on the topic of Zorua, I forgot to for some reason I added in that Ash's Hisuian Zorua evolved, but he already did that back when they were in Kanto, so that was a mistake on my part, and I touched on that a while back. So I want to say I'm sorry, and his Zoroark is actually male. For some reason, I mixed up I accidentally swapped the genders in one of the parts, because Drax's Zorua is female, and Ash's Zoroark is male. Anyway, so, where's the others? Said Drax. James said that Ash had taken Serena out to help her catch more Pokemon, as she wanted to get a hold of another Ralts. "What is with this group and Ralts?" said Drax. "Ralts is a cool Pokemon," said Jesse. "You're not wrong," he said. "Speaking of which, has your Ralts decided what she wants to evolve into yet?" He said. "She's leaning more towards Griefist," said Jesse. "Which type?" said Drax. "She hasn't decided on that one yet." Drax headed out to the back of the Pokemon Center to go and train with Zorua. Zorua, being one of his original Pokemon, should have gotten more training and more attention than she was getting, and it was noticeably getting to her, so he decided to help her out with more training. Surprisingly, she had been keeping up when he wasn't paying attention, so he was very proud of her for that. While they were training, they heard a rustling in the bushes before a large purple and yellow lizard-like Pokemon came out of the brush. It was a Toxtricity. Said Toxtricity was very angry and rampaging around like it had lost its mind or something. Zorua jumped in and used Tackle on it, not sending it back a few meters, but it then went back to rampaging, specifically targeting Zorua. In the process, Zorua was shocked multiple times. Luckily for her though, she was able to tank those hits. It wasn't until the Toxtricity took note of Drax and decided to attack him that Zorua decided to jump in the way and take the blast for him. In the process, Zorua began to evolve. However, being shocked and poisoned by Toxtricity's electricity while evolving at the same time had a weird effect on her. If it was one thing Drax knew about his Zorua was that she was extremely loyal and would throw herself in front of a moving truck for him if necessary. She was one of his very first Pokemon that he caught. In fact, she was the fourth Pokemon he caught and always stuck by his side, even when it took her far too long to evolve. So seeing that that the electricity and poison that were both affecting her during evolution was starting to worry him. He was about to come forward until the evolution finished. Like many of his Drax's Pokemon, Zorua was given the ability to speak human language, This also had effect on her evolution as well, as as the electricity supercharged the serum that flowed through her bloodstream. When the light faded to reveal Zorua in her new form, Zoroark, Drax was shocked by her new appearance. This wasn't a regular Zoroark, at least not anymore. She would have been a regular Zoroark if that electricity and poison hadn't caused as much trouble as it did. Zoroark's main color was now yellow, and the mane on her head was purple with blue highlights. The fur that was around her chest was also the same shade of blue, and her claws were also purple, just like her hair. Overall, Zoroark looked like, well, a Delta species Pokemon now, which in fact is what she was. Because of the electricity and poison messing with her evolution, it caused her to become a Delta species Zoroark, being electric and poison instead of being dark. In her new form, she was more resistant to both poison and electricity, but still had access to her dark-type moves, which she did not hesitate in laying the smackdown on Toxtricity for attacking what is essentially her best friend. After knocking out the Toxtricity with a few of her Poison Claw attacks, which were some of her new moves, Drax threw a Pokeball and caught it, congratulating Zoroark on the evolution and the type change as well as helping him figure out a new way to possibly find out more about Delta species, although he wasn't really interested in actually attempting to try this method because it looked like it hurt a lot. But it was still very interesting that it was possible to turn a Pokemon into a Delta species by using moves on them during their evolution. At this point, both Ash and Serena had returned, and noticeably, Serena had a new Pokemon with her. As well as her starter had seemingly evolved, now being a Florigato instead of a Sprigatito. Serena's new Pokemon was a Cyclizar. However, the Cyclizar looked off. It noticeably did not have the inflation sacs that a Cyclizar normally had, nor did it seemingly look like it was, well, dragon. It was still notably a Cyclizar, but it had features that of mammal-like as well as reptilian-like. The main thing that was noticeable about it was the fact that it had what looked like the ears of another Pokemon on its head, as well as the tail of that same Pokemon. It looked like it was part Flareon. A Flareon Cyclizar hybrid. That shouldn't be possible. Flareon and Cyclizar can't breed. The gang were more intrigued by Zoroark in her new electric and poison type form, who explained that she had gained this form through being electrocuted and poisoned at the same time while she was evolving. Ash's Zoroark walked over and looked her up and down before giving her a thumbs up, still having the scowl on his face that he was known for. "You are not good at giving compliments, are you?" she said. "I am literally angry half the time, grumpy at least 20% of the time, and the other 30% goes directly to malicious. A thumbs up is the best you can get from me." A few of Drax's Paradox Pokemon came out of their ball. This included Carnacoon, both Koraidon and Miraidon, not the Miraidon that he uses as the motorbike, the other one, the one that's female, and his newer Iron Valiant, or his other Gardelade, the one that was more male, or the one that said he was male. They all gathered around Serena's newly caught Pokemon, very intrigued at its appearance, as it looked like a mixture of two different Pokemon, and the fact that it was an anomaly, like the rest of them were. When the Cyclizar was asked about his strange appearance, he said that he was actually experimented on, and that's the reason why he didn't look normal. Hearing this caught Drax's attention and asked who he was experimented on by. The Cyclizar claimed to not know who they were. All he knew was that they all wore very bright orange tuxedos that were very ugly to look at. They also wore bright orange sunglasses that also were ugly to look at. Drax narrowed his eyes at this, and then decided that he would keep an eye out for these orange tuxedoed people, as he was going to give them a piece of his mind. The gang then heard what sounded like the noise of a motorcycle, or at least a motorcycle engine revving up. They looked around, trying to figure out what the noise was, until they saw a very familiar-looking cloud of dust heading their way. Said cloud of dust looked like it was making a beeline directly for Drax. A few moments later, it arrived in the close vicinity of them and stopped directly before running into Drax full force. When the dust cleared, it revealed a brand new Charcadet evolution. Not one of his Pokemon, but it was still noticeably a Charcadet evolution. She had exhaust pipes coming from all over her body. Three on each shoulder to resemble shoulder pads, 2 coming out of the back of her armor, 4 more that surrounded the gauntlets on her arms, and 2 more coming attached to the greaves on her calves. The heel of her calves also seemingly had wheels in them. Curious about this new evolution of Charcadet, Drax asked, "Is there something that she wanted, and what was her name?" She called herself Gatlarange, and that she was, well, close friends of what appeared to be a Charcadet evolution that she may know by the name of Spectraline, and she saw him specifically with her. Drax said, yeah, and that was Spectraline, that he knew her, and he guessed that that she was sort of like from the same kind of thing going on as her and her sisters were. To which Gatlarange said that she was. Gatlarange, instead of having an arm cannon or melee weapons, the exhaust pipes on her gauntlets would rotate until they had turned into 4-barreled Gatling guns that shot what is essentially exploding fireballs out of the ends. The wheels on her heels were also part of the armor and were capable of making her go zoom fast. She also apologized for almost cutting them off yesterday. The reason she had hunted them down was because, well, she heard that he was responsible for helping other Charcadet evolutions get their evolutions, and so she wanted to assist. As well, who better to assist as another Charcadet evolution that made her own custom armor, just like Spectraline did. Cool, said Drax. He then proceeded to throw a Pokeball at her, which caught her off guard at first, but then she just let herself get caught. He let her back out of the ball, and then proceeded to basically give her the rundown of what pretty much they do around here. He also warned her to keep an eye on Red, as she tends to do things behind his back. It was then that Vio, Drax's Glade, approached Gatlarange. "Tell me, lass," he said, "what's your opinion on a fair fight?" Gatlarange looked at him for a second before saying that it's a stupid concept. Vio simply nodded for a minute before turning to Drax. "She be a keeper. Stick with me, lass. I'll teach you all the good shit." "Don't listen to him. He's a bad influence," said Cerulege. "I know, and I'm proud of it," he said. "Also, shut your ass before I decide to kick you in the booty again." Cerulege turned purple at that, as, she can't really blush red, she can only blush purple. Before a sly smirk then appeared on Vio's face. "Oh, you blushing at that, are ye? Did you like it?" This caused her black skin to turn even more purple. "I see," said Vio. "So a masochist, are ye?" Vio began to walk over into Cerulege's direction. Meanwhile, Gyroblast was getting Armarouge's attention, pointing in the direction of the group. Or of the two. "Looks like you might win the bet," he said. Cerulege began to back up with every step that Vio took to get closer to her. She eventually backed up into a tree with Vio putting his hand directly next to her head. "Did I find a dirty secret of yours?" he said. Cerulege began to protest before Vio cut her off. "Don't worry. When we spar from now on, I be only aiming for your posterior." At this point, Cerulege was all but purple. To which she slumped down to the ground on her knees with a steaming head. Vio just chuckled to himself before he began walking off. Armarouge looked over at Gyroblast. "Well, they haven't gotten together yet, but when they do, I'll be sure to be asking for those Pokepuffs. Until I see proof, you ain't getting shit from me." "Oh? How about we make a bet right now, then?" she said. "What kind of bet?" said Gyro. "Aside from Spectraline, Vermilion, and Azula, if any of the other Charcadet Evos ends up with another one of the Ralts Evos, then you have to give me 4 Pokepuffs." "And is this before Or after the two we're currently focusing on, said Gyroblast. Before, said Armarouge. And if it's after, said Gyroblast. I give you 4 instead, she said. I guess that sounds fair, he said. He held out his hand for a handshake, and Armarouge took it, and then proceeded to pull him in for a kiss. After pulling away from him, she simply said, I win. Gyroblast stared back at her for a minute, his cheeks noticeably a little bit red from what just happened before saying, I should have seen that coming. Don't make bets with psychic types, boy, she said. As Armarouge began to walk away, Gyroblast began to scratch the back of his head in both embarrassment and disbelief at the fact that he had fallen for that, and also a little bit of confusion as to how he ended up getting into a relationship with the fire-type arm cannon user. He looked around for a minute before noticing Shatter looking at him with a smug smirk on his face. What are you looking at, you overgrown jackrabbit? He said. Oh, just amused at the fact that I'm no longer the only one who has to deal with an extremely pushy wife, he said. Says the man who's currently egg-sitting, said Gyroblast, noting the egg that was being held in Shatter's arms. Oh no, you're not pinning this back on me, boy. This'll be you soon, he said, gesturing to himself. At least I'll be somewhat equal in terms of my relationship, said Gyro. You, on the other hand, are not the one wearing the pants in yours. He then looked over in Titana's direction. Or, in this case, yoga pants, he said. I think they're more along the lines of stockings, actually, said Shatter, considering that, they're not really pants and they only cover up her legs. Actually, her legs are just shaved in that form. How does that work, actually? She swaps between both forms, and yet one of them, her legs are shaved, and then they just aren't in the other? It's also the same on some of the rest of her body, too. I'm confused, he said. Women are mysterious creatures, said Gyroblast. Yes, they are, said Shatter. And that is where we are going to end this part for today. If you guys enjoyed, like and subscribe. I will see you in the next one.